Canadians instinctively know it should not be free to pollute in this country.
Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. I was just watching the press conference with the Prime Minister as he celebrated the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement and threw a few barbs at Alberta, obviously, and Saskatchewan as people who don't want to put a price on pollution. Well, I'm kind of sick and tired of that because, in fact, Alberta had the first environment ministry in Canada. Alberta had the first environment minister in Canada, Ralph Klein. Alberta had the first wind farm in Canada in 1993. And by 2002, Alberta had implemented legislation that was passed in 2003 that was the leader in all of North America on climate change and environment. And we had the first GHG tax in North America, in Alberta. So everything that the Prime Minister and his eco-warrior colleagues have said about us is untrue. Of course Alberta cares about pollution, and of course Canada does too. In fact, what's ironic is that most of the people on the stage at this press conference were born in the 1970s, and that's exactly when the North American Clean Air Act came in. That's when noxious pollutants started being paid for. And people have been paying for pollution for 50 years. And as far as implementing any kind of law to ensure that we have clean air and clean water, we have all kinds of regulations and incentives. We have over 600 of them, according to Robert Lyman, at all levels of government combined. So 600 different regulations or incentives to reduce GHGs, to reduce pollution, or to offer incentives for so-called clean tech. Now, the Prime Minister in his chat talked about how investors around the world are moving to a clean tech world. Well, they're not. You just have to look at the IEA statistics on any country in the world, and you'll find that most of them, perhaps the exception of Iceland, a country of 300,000 people, Norway, a small country of maybe 5 million people. Iceland runs on geothermal because it's sitting on top of a bunch of volcanoes. Norway runs on hydro because it's got all these fjords and rivers and glaciers. Well, great, but not every country has that. Most of the countries are running on oil, natural gas, and coal. That makes up about 84% of the energy consumed in almost all countries in the world. So you just have to look at the EIA reports, or you can look at our own report where we rebutted the earlier proposals by the federal government. Our report is called Penury or Prosperity, and we make the case that if you're going to have clean tech, you can't have it without oil, gas, and coal, because there's no other form of energy to make these things, to make a wind turbine, to make a solar panel. You just can't make it from wind or solar energy. So I think what's important too is, Alberta learned a lot of lessons by being a leader on environment and climate issues. One of the lessons we learned from putting in a wind farm in 1993 was that if you're going to add more wind, you have to add conventional power. So in about 2005, the Alberta Electric System Operator reported to the Alberta government that adding more wind to the grid would require the building of more power plants. So if people don't think about that, but if you don't have sufficient conventional power, then when the wind stops or the sun goes down, your grid is going to collapse. And having a blackout in modern society will destroy the economy far worse than the COVID-19 lockdowns will do. And the other thing that I think is important is that the Prime Minister suggested that because we believe the science on COVID-19, therefore we should believe the science on climate change. Well, if that's so, then we should believe what Roger Pielke Jr. has just published, that actually climate science has been working on outdated information. So all of the premises of the federal government's plan. All of the premises of the multi-billion-dollar investment firms are all based on faulty climate science. They should have done due diligence. And guess what? In Alberta, we did that. Because back in 2000, Dr. Madhav Kandekar was asked by the provincial government to do a report for them assessing the uncertainties in the greenhouse gas theory of climate change. So he did a literature review, and I interviewed him a couple of years ago. And at that time, I asked him, had anything changed since then? And he said yes. He said, the uncertainties are still there, and there are many more. So Alberta has done due diligence in every regard, and we are being mocked and skewered by federal ministers when they have not done due diligence. And frankly, as an Albertan, I'm sick of it. You know, we deserve way more respect. And as for the carbon tax, the report, A Healthy Environment, A Healthy Economy, offers a tax them and bribe them with their own money option, which is that you're going to get a carbon rebate. And the higher the carbon price goes, the more money you get to put in your pocket. But that's a lie, because the higher the carbon price goes, the higher the cost of everything will go. And what seems to be a tasty little morsel of money today will never cover and never catch up with all of the costs that you'll have in the future because of the carbon tax. Carbon taxes have never worked anywhere in the world to reduce emissions. In the report that they offer, they say that in Sweden, emissions were reduced. But in fact, emissions were reduced not because of the carbon tax, but because Sweden opened a bunch of nuclear power plants. And in Norway, in the 1990s, they imposed a very heavy carbon tax, hoping that it would reduce emissions. And Norway is like 95% running on hydro to begin with. And they found that there was only a 2% change due to the carbon tax. They found it was a much better idea to work with industry to reduce emissions, again, in this long, thoughtful process that has happened over the years with the reduction of noxious pollutants. In Canada, we have been paying for pollution for more than 50 years. We have been following the North American Clean Air Act, and noxious pollutants have dropped dramatically over those 50 years. During the time when these kids were growing up to be the adults they are today, we adults were already busily implementing climate and environment policies to give our kids, these guys, cleaner air and cleaner water and a better earth. And they don't respect that. In fact, they don't even know about it. So it's time that they did some of their own due diligence, and it's time that they stopped disrespecting Alberta and other dissenting voices on climate change policy. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.